Hey folks, Quilly here, and welcome to another episode of our base building tutorial for Unity. We are codenamed Project Porcupine, and in this episode, we are going to continue to develop our utterly beautiful and super functional user interface over here, where we can build floors or bulldoze them, but we are going to add the ability to build walls at this point, which is certainly the next step. Now, what's going to be interesting here, and that's going to shake things up, is that walls are not tile types. Walls, in fact, are going to be objects, so-called installed objects that exist above tiles. Walls will have to be built on top of floors, so we need some sort of foundation, which is what these floors are going to be, and we're going to build walls on top of that. Now, I have gone and drawn some absolutely beautiful walls over here. I decided to go with sort of a bluish metallic look. Obviously, all this will get redesigned at some point in the future, hopefully by someone with actual artistic talent. We'll go and crowdsource that at some point. But for now, here's what's going on. The idea is I have, unless I have missed one, gone ahead and created a version of walls for every single possible sort of neighboring pair over here. And actually, if I turn off the effects, you'll see quite simply, all I did is draw just these flat shapes. And actually, I've just noticed that these guys here, not that it matters, but it's going to annoy me if we don't fix it, are just off by one tile, and then the same thing here. They don't actually have to be on the grid at all, but it's going to annoy me if they're not. There we go. That seems better. So all I did is I drew these squares like this, and then just gave them a bevel and emboss feature, which you can easily do. If you don't have Photoshop, you can do the same thing in GIMP or all kinds of different drawing programs over here, just to make it a little shaded and looks like it's a wall. Now, it's important to note, I couldn't have just drawn one of these shapes once and then rotated it inside of Unity because the shadow wouldn't be correct. So I had to draw every orientation over here and do that. And then I sort of just tweaked the bevel and emboss to a certain level so that what would happen is that these straight bits like this, right, wouldn't have any funny pixels. They sort of do over here, but it's hardly an issue. So the end result is what we have is every combination of wall based on how many neighbors. So this is a wall over here in the top left corner. This one here is if it has no walls next to it. In fact, to start off with, we're just going to draw these. But the idea is later on, what we're going to want to do is update our wall drawing thing so that while the tile data won't know any difference. It'll just know this tile has a wall object in it. Boom, done. But on the visual layer, we're going to want to use slightly different graphics depending on what our neighbors are so that things look like they're connected. And actually, I just realized I could do one more variant of this as well. If I go and draw a square, no, it's slightly off. Let's zoom in a bit. I don't know if this will come up, but it might. So I was thinking about neighbors, but there is another combination, which is to say, what if we've drawn a sort of block of walls that even have sort of a diagonal neighbor? In that case, we're going to want this sort of chunkiness. Might as well just draw it so we have it. We'll see what happens when we get there. Now, I'm going to pop into Unity, and then we're going to have to go and set this up. Now, I also have some lovely door graphics, so let me go ahead and show you this. Doors! Nothing going on here. We'll redo that later. But we've got walls. Oh, sorry, double-clicking on it opens it in Photoshop. I actually want to go into the Sprite editor, and I am in play mode, so I cannot edit this. So let me try that again. Sprite editor. Thank you very much. Okay, and I had actually drawn some sprites already, but I'm going to go ahead and remove them. Really? You can't bulk erase all sprites? Really? Come on, Unity. Hold on. What if I say, hey, this is a single sprite, apply. Then I switch it back to a multiple sprite and apply. Do you get rid of them? No, you still remember what's there. That's very annoying. All right, let's go in and purge all these things, and we'll go ahead and draw these all out. I thought originally I had a layout that I was like, oh, we'll just use this, and then I'll save myself some time, and then I realized I'd missed a couple of walls, so there we go. Okay, so to review first of all, we have our graphic here, our wall. We've told Unity that this graphic, this sprite, has multiple sprites in it. It's not just one graphic. We will have to tweak these pixels per unit, of course, because we've already seen that. Our floor, we're using 32 pixels. Well, ultimately, what's important here is that one square in our design over here, right? We need to make sure that this, inside of Unity, is 1 unit. right? That's what we want. And this happens to be 32 pixels by 32 pixels. So just like we did with our floor, we're going to want to go to our wall and tell Unity, hey, listen, 32 pixels is 1 unit. So when we drop it into the world here, we don't have to do any funky scaling things. Everything will just meet up perfectly. We've also gone and set the filtering to point mode so that you get more pixel perfect stuff, which I think is going to be the style we're going to want as opposed to some of these blendings. We're not going to need MIP maps at all, so we may as well save that. And we don't want it to be compressed. These are going to be relatively small graphics overall. I mean, they're not going to be distributed as the PSD file. They'll be changed into some sort of bitmap format, so they still won't be as big as your PSD. And by not compressing it, your hand-drawn graphics like this start to look a little wonky. It's like if you take like a font or a straight line type of graphic and you save it as a JPEG, you get weird artifacting. Same thing happens over here. So I'm going to the sprite editor. So what we're going to do is we're going to define some wall graphics. And I suppose, I mean, to start off with, we really only need one, which is going to be this guy over here, this sprite, 32 by 32. Make sure the dimensions look good. I have decided on a standard of having our pivot point at the bottom left corner. There's no reason you need to do this. If you did have everything have a pivot in the center, that's fine. You just have to, accommodate for that in your math. In this case, I'm going to be happy. Pivot point in the bottom left corner. So we got our sprite here, and I'm just going to call this sprite wall, like that. And then the idea is later on, we'll use these. We may just skip out on this for now, but let's say I'm going to draw another one. So let's say this thing here, this is going to be a wall. It's 32 by 32, so I dragged it out successfully. You can sort of tweak around things or change these numbers. That's an easy way to make adjustments. If you're just off by a little, you can just change the number here and then end up with the proper adjustment. We're going to make sure that the pivot point is at the bottom left corner. We're going to have to do that for each one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name these based on which neighbors. So this is a wall that has a neighbor to the east and to the south. I'll use the standard NESW kind of ordering, right? North, east, southwest. We'll go clockwise. So in this case, we have an eastern neighbor and a southern neighbor. And what we're going to do is we're going to repeat that pattern throughout everything else. I will not go and do all of these on screen on this particular tutorial because it'll be way too time consuming. In this tutorial, we're only going to concern ourselves with placing actually the base wall, the wall version with no neighbors. I suppose for consistency, it should actually be wall underscore, because everything else is going to be wall underscore and then directions, right? So this one will be wall underscore EW. This one over here will be wall underscore NESW because it's got all 4 neighbors. And then maybe we'll do something with this later on. Maybe we won't. I don't know. We'll play that one by ear and then we'll figure out what we're going to do in that case. But there we go. So for now, our concern is to try to get this wall into the world. And that shouldn't be too hard, but it's going to raise a few questions. So what we want really to start off with, from a user interface point of view, we want another button, right? No problem. We've got, we built this last time. We've got our build menu here with build floor, bulldoze. Let's go ahead and just duplicate build floor. So I'm just going to hit Control D over here, and we're going to rename you to, build wall. Build wall. And that's just the name of the game object. We also have to update the text over here to say wall. There we go. And we might want to change the order here so that, say, this button is at the top, like that. And we can tell our build menu to resize itself so everything is hunky-dory. I'm sure there's probably another way to do this automatically with some of the UI elements. Maybe with something with one of these grids, you can set something or other, or the content size, or whatever. But you know what? This is going to be fine for now. I'm sure someone in the comments will actually give me a better way. And I'm really looking forward to that, actually. The UI, I'm still relatively new to it, and we haven't done that much work with UI, so we're still picking up some hints and tricks and things here. But anyway, now we have a button to build the wall. Great, except what does it do? Well, when we click it, right now, it's calling on our mouse controller, it's calling a function called set mode build floor. Well, obviously that's not right. We're going to want to set mode build wall. And again, I've said this before, in the future, we might change the way these functions work, especially as we get more and more and more objects, for example. That's weird. That was never grayed out before. Is that a change in 5.3? You can't change the script from there, which I suppose certainly makes a lot of sense. I'm happy that double-clicking on it still opens up mono-develop. This is the new mono-developed, included with Unity 5.3. It also includes, I believe, the Visual Studio build right out of the box, which means at some point in the future we may make a change over there. I've been using mono-develop just because for tutorials I wanted to keep things as the default setting, but there's a lot of advantages to going to the Visual Studio, but that'll be something for the future. Okay, so in mouse controller, we have these functions here: set mode build floor, set mode bulldoze, and obviously we're going to want some sort of thing called build wall. What is that going to look like? Well, because right now, all we do when we set this, we change which tile we are placing. We're changing the tile type from empty to floor. But the problem is wall is not a tile type. Wall is not a tile. Wall is an installed object that exists on top of a tile. So what we need to do then is we need to have a little bit more depth in our build modes. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. I suspect, again, this might be something that gets expanded on later and made a little bit more advanced. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to have either another enum, or maybe this could just be a Boolean. Build mode maybe, what do I want to call this? Because the idea is, like, it's going to be true or false. Either we're building objects or we're building tiles. Build mode is objects. Sure. We'll set this to false. And what's going to be important is here when we set the build floor, we set this to false. And when we're building, bulldozing rather, we set it to false. Here, we're going to be setting it to true. We need a couple other little checks because everything here with update dragging, this is currently the code for dragging out floor, which I think things are going to work a fair bit differently with, well, certainly doors. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to drag doors down. Walls you do kind of want to drag, though. That's kind of an interesting question. Well, we're only going to focus on walls right now. So let's assume you want to be able to drag and drop a section of walls as well. So that means that everything in update dragging so far is still in here, right? We've got the dragging preview. All these things are happening. The only thing that's going to change for so far is when we end the drag, that's when we set the tiles. But instead of setting a tile type, so if build mode is objects, I'll make it explicit. Don't need this equal true, but let's make it quick. We're going to create the installed object and assign it to the tile. Else, actually, we should still, I suppose, wrap everything in. Make sure the tile's not null. Make sure the tile's not null, then do things. That still makes sense. And then else, we are in tile changing mode. So here, we're going to create an installed object. Here, we're just setting a tile type. Now, what we need to know at this point is what is the object that we're going to install here? So clearly, we're going to have to set, because we're going to want to know walls versus doors, right? But let's assume right now we're only working with walls, right? Fix me. Right now, we're just going to assume walls. We'll figure out the other step after. So what does it mean for us to put a wall here? Well, again, what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate something called an installed object, which is my term for an object that is literally like bolted into the floor. This will include things like furniture, walls, doors. Some people have said, hey, why don't you call these just call them objects, and then loose objects, which is my term for things that are just lying on the floor, like a pile of metal or something like that that you can use to build. Why don't just call this items? Well, one, object and items are kind of synonyms, and especially if English isn't your first language, it becomes really unobvious what one is versus the other. I mean, items is sort of like pretty good as a loose thing, but objects also sort of sounds like a loose thing. Also, object is like a special word in programming and in C#, so it wouldn't be great. So installed object, here, I could put a comment over here. Installed objects are things like walls, doors, and furniture, e.g. a sofa. Right? And loose objects, oops, that's not what I meant to do. I could have undone, I suppose. Loose objects are things that are lying on the floor / stockpile, like a bunch of metal bars. Or, potentially, a non-installed copy of furniture, e.g. a cabinet still in the box from IKEA, right? So that's a cabinet that hasn't been built and installed yet, for example. So it's just sitting in a stockpile somewhere ready to go. So that's the differentiation between the two. We are not working with loose objects today. We are going to be working with installed objects over here. And our tile is already set up to have an installed object. It's totally ready. It's like, yep, I've got a place to keep track of the fact that I've got an installed object in my tile. We're never going to allow more than one installed objects in here. Everything is awesome. But this is bare bones. We got to flesh this bad boy out. In fact, we might not even get to the point where we actually place the object in this video, because I suspect we are mostly going to be fleshing out some of the logic over here. So, what should this installed object know about itself? It should probably know which tile it's in. I think that probably makes some sense, right? The tile will know what installed object is in it, but the installed object should probably know the other way around, right? So if I have a copy of an installed object in a function somewhere, from this I can find out what tile it belongs to, which is pretty good. I don't need to know my x and y coordinate because the tile is aware of that. It's got its own, right over here, x and y, so we've got that. That's great. Is there anything else we need to know? Well, we sort of need to know what type of object we are, right? Very much like how the tile has these tile types, installed objects is going to need the same sort of thing. We're going to need to know that this is a sofa versus a table versus a wall. Because, well, the graphic system is going to need to know what graphic to generate from that. And then at some point, we're also going to need to know rules like, can we walk through this tile? So how are we going to store all this? I think rather than have some enums for this, I think our installed object is going to have something like a string that just tells the system that this is where we track what the object type is. And roughly, this is going to basically map to the graphic, basically, right? So you can easily imagine. So object type or ID, something like that. I guess we're using tile type, so let's use object type. But instead of being an enum, this is going to be a string. Now, we could make this an enum and predefine everything, right? I could have enum object type, and just like we have over here, and then have and then we list all the object types. We say wall, door, sofa, etc., etc., etc. And then over here we have something like this, and we'll set it to some default, that sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with this, but I'm going to make the case that unlike the tile types, we really don't need to predefine what objects are available in here. Instead, we're going to be able to sort of create them on the fly somewhere else. So an object type is also going to need to know things like bool, maybe is walkable. Actually, instead of that, let's do something like, let's have something like a float that contains walk speed. Movement cost, which is going to default to 1. A movement cost. So this is a multiplier. So a value of 2 here means you move twice as slowly, right? Or at half speed, i.e. at half speed. Tile types And other environmental effects may further act as multipliers. For example, a rough tile with a, say, cost of 2, with a table cost of 3 that has debris, or, is on fire, cost of 3, would have a total movement cost of 2 times 3 times 3, or maybe add it up. May be combined. Total movement cost of 2 plus 3 plus 3 equals 8. So you'd move through this tile at 1/8 normal speed. Yeah, presumably something like this in the future. I mean, makes sense, right? Sure. Let's pretend. So let's assume the default is 1, that some things don't have a movement cost. Oh. Special. If movement cost is equal to 0, then this tile is impassable. E.g. a wall. Right. That's good. Anything else we need to know about this installed object? Probably its size is actually what I'm thinking. Because early on, our objects are just like a wall just sits in one tile. But a sofa, again, might be like a 3x1 object. Actually, the visuals for a sofa might be a 3x1 object, but it might require that it's got extra space in front of it. So in practice, it might act like a 3x2 object. And I think that would be an excellent idea, because that way it would guarantee that all that area would be empty. It would occupy all that. So in fact, this represents the base tile of the object. But in practice, large objects may actually occupy multiple tiles. So really, we should have something like an int width, int height. Oh, these should probably default to 1. We'll worry about accessors and things later on. We're just trying to think of what kind of data. So again, for example, a sofa might be 3x2. Actual graphics only appear to cover the 3x1 area, but the extra row is for leg room. That's an example. Okay, I think at this point we have a decent idea about the actual data. And so this object type will be, for example, queried by the visual system to know what sprite to render for this object. I think this is going to be good. Something relatively like this. And how do we set all this? I guess we'll set a constructor. This seems relatively straightforward. Sure, let's do something like that. So we'll have a public constructor that requires all of these things. Well, it's actually not going to require a tile. Sort of does, sort of doesn't. Basically, what I want to do is I'm actually going to have another function somewhere that creates the, the plutonic version of these objects, right? So I'm going to create one wall from which all other walls will be copied from. Same thing with sofa. So basically, the list of objects that can exist in a game will just be generated. A bunch of installed objects will be generated one after another, and that will be the list of objects that can exist in the game. So this is an installed object. This is where we're going to set it. This is basically used by our, I don't know, it's not the right term, object factory to create the prototypical object. Again, probably this will change later on. Let's keep going. Let's play by ear. Then we'll fix things. So we're definitely going to need the object type. We're definitely going to need, I assume, we'll want to know the movement cost, and the width and height. Right? Let's assume those things are all things that we want. And again, here, actually, let's get rid of these defaults there. But let's go ahead and suggest that these are perfectly adequate defaults to start off with, especially early on when we're just making our wall. So we'll just copy all this. And again, there's better ways of doing this that require a little bit less typing. This will be fine. So we're taking the local version that was passed as a parameter and storing it in the instance of this object and this dot height. Maybe I actually have to, width, and for consistency, there we are. Okay, so we've got that. Note that it doesn't ask for a tile. Then we're going to make a different version of the constructor. It's sort of going to be a copy constructor. So what it's going to be, it's going to ask for another installed object. It's going to ask for the prototype version of it. And it's also going to require that a tile gets passed to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to set all our values from this prototypical version that was passed to us. There might be some more stuff to copy later as we add some more values, but for now we're going to be okay. So we're going to copy everything from this prototype, and then we're going to set our tile to be equal to the tile. But not only that, this might be a great time to say tile.installed_object equals this. Now, we can't do this. It turns red, and the reason for that is, and if we tried to render it, we would get that info right away. My bad for the Gmail message there. Get rid of that. It's because installed object is currently protected. Can't set it directly. Also, it's not spelled with a capital I. Answer that. We can't set that. So the question is, well, we could make this legal. Obviously, I could make installed object public. Sure. I could also have an accessor here. Sure. But that's not really what we want, because we want a slightly more sophisticated system here, because in the example where we have an object that is more than a single pixel wide, it's not just occupying one tile. It keeps track of its one sort of master tile over here so that we know where we are in the map. But what it's actually going to do is flag the installed object on multiple tiles to point to itself so that we know that those tiles are reserved. Not only that, at some point here, there's going to have to be some sort of check to make sure that the tile we're trying to install ourselves into is actually empty. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to have a bit more of a sophisticated function here for actually installing the object in a tile, which is what this is doing here. In fact, arguably, maybe this shouldn't be a public. This could very easily be a protected initializer, and instead we maybe have something like a static public thing that maybe returns a copy that says, actually install object in some tile, blah, 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 blah. That might be the best. We're going to have to find out next time, though. This tutorial's already gone on long enough. Thank you very much for watching, folks. See you next time. Thank you very much to all the November supporters over at patreon.com/quill18creates, and to these mic check level supporters. We've got Alex, we've got Wes Oldenbiving, we've got Andrew, we've got Craig Mortel, Philip Nichols, Neil Blakely Milner, we've got Speedy Savant, we've got Valiant Cake Fiend, Radel Del Peso, Aaron Toivson, maybe? Marius Fieldvold, Tim, Julian Auger Lafont, Stephen Stager, or Stagger, we've got Michael McClintock, and Bunny, and also everyone who's just watched, shared, favorited, subscribed these videos. You really make a massive difference when it comes to keeping the series going and making everything just interesting and awesome. And just thanks for watching and thanks for supporting. See you next time, folks.